Hi everyone, my name's Ben Maylor. I'm a postdoc research associate based in the Wearables Group, which is situated in the Big Data Institute at the University of Oxford. So I'm going to give you a talk today. So we're going to talk about some of our video observational methods and device-based measures. I'm kind of going to pitch the talk as a way of telling you what we've done previously, and then sort of our shift in terms of how we're annotating our video and image data, which we use as a ground truth for behavior types. And then I'm also going to touch upon some of the ongoing work, and that will sort of lead into the sort of data set that we're curating at Oxford, which will be available for use roughly in the next 18 months. I put collaboration at the bottom of the slide to remind myself to always acknowledge various different colleagues from around the world that we've liaised with as we've, for example, been thinking about how we change our annotation schemas. So just a background, I'll try and remove this Zoom thing at the top. Yeah, so there's heterogeneity in device measurement, how we're processing data, and the same conundrums appear with annotating image, but also video data. So different groups in the past, we've used different labeling schemas. One of us might focus more on activity types, what someone's actually doing, if they're walking or cycling. Other groups may just look at intensity and try and label, is someone in sedentary behavior, light or moderate to vigorous physical activity. There's also different levels of detail in those labels. So we could look at labeling just walking, regardless of the context, or we could try and label things such as walking uphill. On top of that, there's other sort of data processing and analytical decisions. So whether we are segmenting data temporally, so are we looking at the majority behavior within a specific time window or epoch, if you like. And then also there are differences in annotation protocols. A really good example might be if I'm walking outside with a video camera and for some reason the view of the camera is obscured, so it just looks like a black screen, and then 20 seconds later I can now see the video again and the person's still walking. Do I assume that they've been walking for that 20-second whole of data? So there's different protocols for how long you might carry forward a behavior before you then say we're not now sufficiently sure what the person's doing. So all of these have similar parallels with just collecting and processing accelerometer data. So what we've done previously, so back in 2014 at Oxford, we collected a data set in 151 adults. These adults wore an autographer. So this is similar to a video camera, but at this stage, it's just taking a still image every 20 seconds. And participants wore this for a single day, hence the name Capture 24. In addition to having the autographer device, they also wore an Activity AX3 on the dominant wrist. Why on the dominant side when most people wear it on the non-dominant in research? It's because the UK Biobank, which we had a big say in the data collection for, also used a dominant wrist for the wear location. So you can see the two devices at the bottom left of the screen here, and then these are some examples of the egocentric image that we get. And from the images, we will label what the person is doing. And when we first annotated these, we started using the Compendium for Physical Activities, which back when we labeled had 821 different labels for activities under 21 major headings. It's since been updated last year, and it's now over 1,000 labels with 22 major headings. So what does that look like in terms of an annotation schema? If we're mapping the compendium of physical activities, we're looking at each image, and then we are sifting through those 800 labels to see which of those labels best represents what the image is showing the person is doing. And this is just an example of some of the possible walking outcomes you could label data with. So in Capture 24, across the 151 adults, we used essentially half of the 800 available labels, such was the richness of the variety of behaviors. So all of these behaviors are represented from the image data. When we actually think about what the majority of studies then have, which is either one or multiple devices, we're just looking at acceleration with a research-grade accelerometer. I don't know how well we could actually distinguish between these in the wild, if you like, where we don't have the photo or the video evidence. So, is it actually necessary for us to have this multitude of labels? I'll put that out as a question and not answer it. So what we did and what we have been doing more recently is, instead of labeling all of these really specific behaviors, we've said it's probably a bit overkill. And what we've done is gone back through these images, or at least what you could also do is use the compendium and then map it back to these just intensities of behaviors. So here's one example of a coding schema, which instead of having 414 distinct labels, will just collapse those behaviors into 3 intensity types and then an uncodable type. We could also do something similar where we look at, instead of the intensities of behaviors, we could look at the type of behavior. So, for example, we might have cycling, walking, sitting, driving, etc. But certainly a lot less than 400 labels. So that's what we've done previously, and that was with image data. So we just had an image every 20 seconds. What we've been doing the last year and will continue to do is collecting more data, but now we're using video data. So I'm going to present these 2 studies to you, which are ongoing. I unfortunately missed all the amazing talks last night because I was with a participant for this study. We're doing 2 parallel studies. One is called Oxwares, and that's recruiting 160 adults aged 40 plus from an existing cohort called the Oxford Biobank. And we're stratifying so that we get equal representation across different age bands, sex, and also BMI categories. Alongside that, at the same time, we're doing another study called OxSleep, and this is essentially the exact same methods, bar a few extra questionnaires, and this is now in younger adults, so 18 to 30 years old. For both of these studies, participants wear several different devices. So they wear a wearable ECG with an accelerometer on the chest, which we will use as the best reference measure for heart rate. Then we have a research-grade accelerometer on the dominant wrist, which is the Actigraph Leap. We have a commercial activity tracker, which is the Fitbit Sense on the non-dominant wrist. And as Alex said, that's because Fitbit asks you to wear it on the non-dominant wrist. We also have the Actigraph GT3X on the hip. And then we have an Activity AX6 device on the thigh and on the ankle. As well as this, we have a video camera. So here's an example of a participant wearing this. We have a couple of different ways of them wearing the device, including a chest harness and a necklace. And this is now going from 1 image every 20 seconds to 30 frames a second, which is really going to enrich our ability to label behaviors. We are also conducting a 3rd study, which I've just thrown in at the end here, so everyone's aware, which uses all the same devices that I've circled, but instead of having the video camera facing out for an egocentric perspective, we now have it pointing down at the floor, because we're really interested in how well, for example, the thigh and the ankle can be a sort of proxy measure for step count. So we're going to collect in 50 adults video across 1 day each, and we're going to annotate every step that they complete during their waking behaviors. Here's a breakdown of the protocol across the day. So it's a 3.5 day protocol. So on the first night, we will conduct a multi-lead polysomnography. And then over the next 3 days, participants will wear all those devices. And we have also included an under mattress sleep sensor, the Withings device, which, yeah, you could say it's not a wearable, it's a nearable, but will also just give us that extra measure of when participants are getting in and out of bed, which is one major issue, I suppose, with us detecting sleep at certain wear locations. Is we're great at knowing when people get in and out of bed, but not necessarily when they're asleep. And then, so with that video data, in terms of the harmonization side of things, so we have been in discussions with various colleagues such as Sarah Keedle, Matthew Armadi and Manos in Sydney, who were also collecting video data, whether it be free living and also laboratory based, and really discussing our code books and our methods for our annotation protocols to make sure that we are aligning our code book and at least providing similar annotations so that this data is harmonizable. Instead of using the compendium for activities, we are, like I said, looking at simpler annotation schemas. So we are looking more at activity type and intensity, as well as thinking about other streams of data, such as the heart rate that we will have to potentially consider relative and absolute intensity outcomes as well. Now that we have the video data, we're able to synchronize all the devices together much easier by literally filming the devices before we put them on a participant and giving them a shake, so that we can then align all the raw data. And then just finally to point out that for the 3 studies I've mentioned in this talk, including the previous one, all of these are due to be shared eventually once the data has been collected, annotated, and cleaned. So we will have a CC BY license, which would essentially allow you to find the data online and download it yourself. I just want to quickly thank the Wellcome Trust, who funds myself and other people in our group, as well as the 2 studies which will take a long time and have funded the sheer amount of resource that's required to collect those data sets of that magnitude, as well as colleagues at the Ox Wearables, in the Ox Wearables team, and everyone who I've mentioned who we've collaborated with internationally. Thank you very much.
And I think with that, we're giving the word to Kerstin, and then thereafter Julian, and then we'll do questions after those 2 presentations. So over to you, Kerstin.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for everyone being around that late in some parts of the world. So I will be focusing on the harmonization of device-based measures. So my name is Kerstin Bach, and I'm a professor in AI at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. So what I'll be talking about is why harmonization matters, because we have already heard quite a bit this evening about that we have this problem with different devices and uncomparable measurements, and what we would like to do is to harmonize, because without harmonization we cannot really pool data, replicate studies, and are not really able to use the data that actually has been collected. So one of the key challenges is therefore, we want to we want to kind of have the same behavior and allow same types of interpretations. As a little disclaimer, I'll have a little bit more of a machine learning view, like how we handle data and what we can actually maybe do with this to address this problem. So first of all, I thought about a few different approaches that exist to harmonization. So first of all, we could harmonize at the raw data level, which means we could look into resampling. I mean, we briefly talked about frequencies, so to basically have a common frequency before we analyze our data. Another point could be the calibration or correction of different types of offsets, so that the signals need to be harmonized. The other point that could happen is the rotation, so that we need to make sure that devices could have been moved so that we have a common understanding. And another part that we often do is the normalization, sort of basically have a gravity normalized acceleration, which allows the machine learning models also to be more generalized. A second part is that we can harmonize during feature extraction. So when we process the data from the raw data, we can look into identical features across devices. I guess we all are aware of using step counts rather than the raw data. Second point would be using a shared processing pipeline. This also goes back what Marco was mentioning, like kind of sharing the way we analyze data, we process data. And yeah, so the overall aim is to find a common type of representation rather than necessarily using the raw data itself when building these models. A third option could be to kind of harmonize at the model level so that we, for example, look into instead of facing the data as a source, we can look into or make the machine learning model recognize what kind of movements would be between different devices. So that could kind of be done through domain adaptation. So there the model basically learns to produce similar what we call embeddings for the same behavior and then work with that. Second approach could be transfer learning, so that we basically learn a function that maps from one device to another, or especially in domains where we cannot really share data, federated learning could be an option. When we look into all these methods, one method that probably stands out these days or the last years is something called self-supervised learning. This is the technology that stands behind this machine learning and these large language models. And we could also use this for other purposes, such as the work with the sensor data. To give you a little bit of an overview of the different approaches, so we have the traditional view, which is supervised learning. So basically, if we have an input, which could be an image, and then we have a set of labels. In this case, this could be a cow. So we try to train a model that recognizes from the image that this is a cow. The second type is unsupervised learning, where we have a limited power because we only have an input. We do not have a label. So we basically train a model that can differentiate different patterns, but it's not necessarily able to say what type of pattern it differentiates. And now in self-supervised learning, we try to combine both perspectives. So we basically derive label from co-occurrences. So you can see this, that we on the one hand have a cow that kind of, or an image of a cow that's shown to the model. And on the other side that we have a noise. So we have a that introduced to the model. And then we basically can interplay and teach the model what these different inputs mean. And of course, since we are not necessarily working with cows or animals, we would have different type of sensor data. So we would have an input that could be running, and then we could have two different sensors. So we can have a thigh and a back sensor. I would like to show you a little bit what we have been doing some time ago. So this was, we have a fairly large population-based study, the Hunt study, which is probably known by quite some of you. And there we have a large data set of 35,000 people of unlabeled data. And then we have some labeled data. And one of the issues we have that sometimes the sensors are only, so in the Hunt study, we have two sensors, one in the thigh and the back, and sometimes one of the sensor was not working or was fallen off or something like that. So as part of this work of self-supervised learning for human activity recognition, we had one study where we looked into whether we can actually either derive one sensor from the other, or what this paper is focusing on is whether we can use the large data set of back and thigh sensor to train a more general model that can handle both type of data sets. So, and what we basically did is we had this input data, we had thigh data, back data, and what we did is we basically swapped them and created an internal representation, which is this Fourier transform. So what you can see here is the raw data, and then we have this representations, which we feed into the model. And the clue is that instead of having the same type of data feeding in, we basically mix and match them so that we then have one representation. And to move on, we basically do some type of masking, which means we are removing some information from a data set. So in this case, this was the back data set. We remove some part of the signal, and then we train a network with a linear projection layer, a transformer, which are two important components. So they basically learn the characteristics of this raw data. And then we have a prediction head, which has the task to reproduce where this was coming from. So this basically tries to reproduce this data stream. And then since we know what we have been masking, we can have a loss function. We can basically say, this is where you went wrong. So this loop goes around and learns more and more how these different characteristics come to play. The interesting thing is, if we do this and train this model on unsupervised data, we can have a small set of supervised data, and then we basically copy these two layers. We this projection layer as well as this transformer encoder block that we have been training on the unsupervised data. And then we feed in either thigh or back data, do the same type of pre-processing. And then in the end, we can tell it the different activities. So we can basically tell it this is a thigh, this is a back, and so on. So when we then look into the results, so I will not go into a lot of details, but what we can see, the first block is purely supervised methods. And then we have the set of self-supervised methods, while the last one, so is the one that turns out best. And then we tried on different data sets. So we have one data set of 20-something healthy adults with the 40 minutes of training data. And then we basically fed in only the thigh data that was labeled. Then we looked into the back data, and then we had some another data set with people 70 plus with the same setup. So we basically can see that we get pretty decent results. So I'm showing you the F1 scores here, which kind of show that we get to decent results. Not as good as having both sensors, but close. So overall, we can see that this approach of learning the characteristics of the data and then using one sensor to predict the activities is a nice approach. And yeah, so when we kind of look back, so this is really interesting because we can reuse already existing data sets, which is nice. And then this could be either including or excluding the labels. When we talk about machine learning models, it's important to look into the robustness of the models, because often when we have small data sets or very much in-lab data sets, those models tend to overfit, so they are often too sensitive. So having a larger data set or kind of introducing some type of noise would improve the generalizability of those models. Yeah, it could enable the collaboration between cross studies, cross countries, because we have slightly different ways of collecting data, maybe also cross devices. Yeah, I think from an AI perspective, this really allows us to look into multi-model, but also real world applications, because these type of data sets would allow us to go much faster into the real world. Yeah, so this sums up my talk, and I'm happy to first, I think, move on to Julian, and then I'll answer some questions later on. Julia is nodding, so I did
Perfect.
the right thing.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so hopefully everyone can hear me. And
Yes.
I'll be closing off the talk with focusing a little bit again on direct observation video schemas, but then also talking about world camera image schemas. And some of the growing pains I've experienced as a person who's been involved with annotating and also creating schemas within like the past 7 to 8 years. And so just a quick outline with introduction. I'll talk about the world camera image schemas, then direct observation video, and then some of my closing thoughts. So in general, whenever an individual creates what I call an annotation system, it's usually created to meet study aims, right? So in this example by Ragusa et al., they want to create a multimodal data set that includes wearable camera video, along with other like depth perception, also accelerometry, to better enhance models that can look at activity patterns within an industrial pipeline. Although it's a little bit dystopian in my taste, we can see that in this case, their labels take screwdriver, align objects, and put screw and match the studied aims, right? In another example by Lascaris et al., they're now using the wearable camera to look at different physical activity patterns and relate that to occupational hazards for workers who are working in a waste management site in Ghana. And now looking at the pictures and the labels, you can see that again, it matches what the study aims are. For something like me, where I'm using focus more so on an older adult population who is going to be community dwelling, maybe more retired, I'm not going to be having an annotation code that is burning or dismantling. Whereas for this study, it makes sense, right? Now, typically along general wearable camera or direct observation video use for getting physical activity, we're going to be seeing that these annotation systems are going to be capturing posture, movement, behavior, intensity, and environment, either directly from the annotation labels themselves, or either like it's going to be derived from the annotations, such as Ben mentioned earlier in our talk. However, there is no overall consensus on how to describe physical activity and sedentary behavior, or even how to get all these patterns of physical activity. And there's also no overall consensus on developing annotation systems as well. And so later on in my talk, I'll be pretty much addressing, is that possible? Are we able to harmonize different annotation schemas, whether it's in wearable camera images or wearable camera video, or even direct observation video? Now, I have a project going on with individuals at Oxford, including Ben, Laura Brockleback, and Abram Schoenfeld, Aidan Doherty as well. The schema that Ben presented earlier, I'm just going to be labeling it as like the Oxford schema. And as Ben mentioned, it is 414 annotation codes derived from the 2011 Compendium of Physical Activities. Now, at UWM, the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, we also have a similar schema derived from the 2011 Compendium of Physical Activities, except we do things a little bit differently. We have two passes, one focused on behavior, which more aligns to the Compendium of Physical Activities, and another pass on posture, which is simply going to be sit, stand, movement, et cetera, et cetera. When I created the schema, I did look at the 414 annotation codes, and when I looked at Ben's presentation, it brought back past memories because I did not want to apply 414 annotation codes. So I tried to reduce it down to 51 annotation codes in total. And just give kind of like an example of how they are different, but also similar. Here we can see an example from the Oxford schema: home activity, self-care, hairstyling, standing. On the UWM schema, it would be something annotated as caring, grooming self from the behavior, and then standing for posture. Great. Okay, and another example, we have home activity, lawn garden, lawn service, mowing lawn. And for UWM, we would annotate this behavior as domestic lawn and garden, but we don't really know what we like. For us, if we were just going to look at the Oxford annotation, we don't really see anything that is specific to movement or posture. Although since it's mowing lawn, we kind of assume that there's going to be movement. When you are mowing the lawn, you're walking, you're pushing the lawnmower. So we can extrapolate movement from that. Unfortunately, when it gets to this last example, where it's home activity, pet care, feeding household animals, we do get that again, we can get the behavior, but what do we really get from posture, right? And again, this is just like differences for the UWM schema. We have two passes, one focused on behavior, another on posture, and the Octave schema is just more so general behavior. Now, when we tried to match the two, we have a data set of 41 older adults who wore the autographer camera for 1 full day, and valid day is approximately 10 hours of images, and images captured every 20 or 30 seconds. We can see that for behavior, if we're going to collapse all the codes into the 4 domains, household, leisure, occupation, transportation, it actually does pretty good for each domain and an overall kappa above 0.7. Now, when we look at posture for sitting, it actually does pretty good with a nice F1 score, but understandably for stand and move, it doesn't do so hot. And this doesn't necessarily say that one is better than the other, but just more so highlighting the fact that for the Oxford schema, it was more so to capture behavior and extrapolate intensity from that. Whereas for the UWM schema, I don't believe I mentioned that it was more so developed to get at calibrating and validating accelerometer algorithms within the free living setting. So for us, we put in posture of sit, stand, and move to get at, hey, is the person sedentary or not? And then from there, see if while they're standing and moving, what behaviors they are doing. So now moving on to direct observation video. There has been some work where we have collaborated in the past to evaluate within and between site agreement for 4 different observation schemas within the United States. And just to highlight some of the things real quick, when we look at activity type or behavior, all 4 sites capture that, and they all capture whole body movement posture as well. If you look on the right-hand side, we can see that there's pretty good inter-rater reliability for each site, which is nice to see. And just off a glance, if you're looking at the whole body movement posture, it looks like most people are capturing the same movements and postures, lying, sitting, standing, et cetera, et cetera. And then if we're going to look at the time for a set of videos that we all annotated with our own schemas, we can see that we get similar estimates of sitting, lying, and standing, or not so much standing, but bicycling and running. For standing and stepping, there is some discrepancies right there, but for overall, it's not too far off, right? It gives some positivity that there can be some amalgamation or cross data sharing across these sites if there needs to be. However, when it comes to activity, we did note that within the paper that the operational definitions and time thresholds just varied way too much. Time thresholds of either 5 seconds or maybe 1 second. Operational definitions where, let's say, a person was going to be considered doing housework. It starts as soon as they walk into a kitchen, whereas another site could have said that housework is only it's going to be when you have a sponge in your hand or a cleaning tool in your hand. That's why we couldn't really do so much in that paper in comparison. I'd also like to highlight that within that paper, we do have supplementary material S4, where we do, I think, a pretty good job of what a recommended annotation manual should be. That is, if you have your code, you really do want to provide an operational definition, cue of when you start the code, some notes, and some examples. Now, you would think that we would be able to do something like that for the activity. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have everyone read that. I don't even want to cover it, but we didn't do so good of a job when we looked at the activity. It's just there was too much, too messy, right? Like I mentioned before, the operational definitions were a little rough. So there are 2 schemas that are pretty similar to each other. Well, I'm going to call it the Cal Poly schema and also the UWM schema. Now, the Cal Poly schema is derived from the American Time Use Survey, and it has 2 passes for behavior and posture. And the UWM schema, very similar to what we do for web cameras, is also derived from the 2011 Compendium of Physical Activities, and it has 2 passes of behavior and posture. But one thing that I think is novel about the UWM schema is that it has different rules for different code categories. Now, to give an example of what I mean by that, if we were going to look at the Cal Poly schema, and let's say we annotate something as housework, the UWM schema would call it perhaps cleaning, right? Now, if we do have a rule that if it's going to be what we call LQ or low quality, high quality code, that if you're going to be doing, let's say, high quality sweeping for greater than 30 seconds, then you're going to actually annotate it as sweeping instead of cleaning. And the reason why we want to do that is because we want to use our direct observation annotations to train a model within the UWM. So risk algorithms and also waste scoring algorithms. And so I believe using something like this, where we have a specific rule versus like, hey, if you're doing something for 30 seconds and it's a more granular definition of you have to be holding onto a broom and you have to be actually doing the movement pattern to call it sweeping, I believe that gives a little bit more, it met our study aims, but then also future-proofs it a little bit, which I'll talk about later. Now, if we're going to look at something like leisure screen-based, right? We don't have as much of a granular definition. We just call it electronics, right? I just call this general codes, and this matches to what you may think. Like if you see a person on a computer, they don't have to actually be typing the entire time when they're on a computer. If they have their hands rested on it, if they're facing a computer screen, and they type every once in a while, then you would call it using computer. However, some discrepancies would still arise where, let's say, Cal Poly schema is called work general, but we don't really have a occupation or work code. We do have a modifier that describes, oh, hey, the person is at their occupation. And this could unfortunately cause like some discrepancies where I believe I don't have too much presents, but I think there's, at least from this, we can get like 70 to 75% accuracy between the schemas. But of course, when it comes to things like occupation, it falls apart a little bit more. So some closing thoughts. Again, annotation systems are created to meet study aims. No one's going to argue against that. But I believe the scaffolding can be the same, where you can be explicit about definitions and include cues and notes and examples. In my opinion, I think future-proofing annotations will require having explicit rules and different code categories. I think more granular categories need to be collapsible. So if you, let's say, if UWM wants to meet with the housework, right? Cleaning can be collapsed into housework, which is nice. Finally, I think environment or domains such as household, leisure, occupation, transportation should be a separate pass or modifier. I was going to include an example for Ragusa et al.'s example, but I'll pass that later on. Anyways, thank you for listening to the presentation, and hopefully that was a good crash course in the growing pains of world camera use and direct observation video.